Hello and welcome. I'm Bob Cusack, Editor-in-Chief of The Hill. Thank you for joining us for our program today, The Future of Cities, a Mayor's Forum. As local leaders gather in D.C. this week for the U.S. Conference of Mayors winter meeting, we will be speaking with mayors of cities large and small on a number of issues, including housing, infrastructure, public safety, and more to get a sense of how we meet the challenges of today and build the city of tomorrow. Before we get underway, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events using the hashtag TheHillCities. Last year, President Biden signed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill and the Inflation Reduction Act into law. Together, the bills represented nearly $700 billion in investment into infrastructure projects across the country. But when and where does the rubber meet the proverbial road? And how will state and local leaders use funds in their communities? To talk about this and more is the co-chair of the U.S. Conference of Mayors Infrastructure Law Implementation Task Force and mayor of Arlington, Texas, Jim Ross. Mayor, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
How important, first of all, is that infrastructure law, which was really teetering during the last Congress, but actually made into law? And how's the implementation going?
Well, implementation is going well, and the bill was critically important. It helps municipalities at every level to not just better your roadways, but to build a foundation upon how your community can grow and prosper.
And what do you think the timeline is when you look at this? Because implementation takes years, especially when you're talking about $700 billion. What do you see both short and long-term goals? Short term for our community deals a lot with immediate things to better the safety of our community, first of all. Police and fire, those are some of the things that we've been able to beef up on the short end, help and repair some of the highways and roadways that are in our community. Broadband is a critical part of it as well. Long term, it's going to take years and years and years, could be a decade or two before we see the true benefits of how this bill plays out. Why that long, though? 2 decades, really?
It really could. I mean, you have to look at how long it takes, first of all, any government organization to get the wheels turning and get things implemented. And once you get those things implemented, then you have to sit back and wait and see the benefits from the implementation of that. How are the things that you've done ultimately going to change lives in your community? You don't see all of those overnight. Sometimes it literally takes years or decades to get it happen. I'll give you, for instance, in the North Texas region, we are aggressively working on a rail system to connect Dallas, Arlington, and Fort Worth. We are about to complete an environmental study that has been going on for years. The environmental study is just one small part of the process by which we get things done.
So you have to check a lot of things, right?
We have to check a lot of stuff. Right. Now, it still may be another 7, 8, 9, 10 years before we actually get to the point to start the construction on a rail system on there. Now, the rail system is critically important, connecting all of our North Texas area, but it could take a long time to see implementation happen.
Regarding bipartisanship among mayors, can you talk a little bit about that? Because we've seen, even though the bipartisan infrastructure bill got through, it's polarizing times. The infrastructure bill really struggled down the stretch, but it got to the finish line. I'm sure it's such a different kind of feel with mayors.
It is. Earlier today, our president and CEO of the U.S. Conference, Mayor Tom Cochran, was talking. And he made a statement that I really loved, and it was directed towards Congress. It says, act like a mayor. And when he says act like a mayor, he means speak in a nonpartisan manner. Don't do what's popular for your party. Right. Don't do those things that are going to help increase your base. Do the things that are important to your community. Make a difference in the community. And that's what I love about this conference. That's what I love about my fellow mayors around the country, because I don't care if you're a Democrat, an independent, or a Republican, we all have the same desire, and that's to benefit our community. And this is the only group, I guess, of quote politicians that I don't see being political with party politics. We come together on a bipartisan manner, and work on strategically bettering our community.
And you think Congress and the White House could learn a little from that, right?
They sure can. Make no bones about it. I'm tired of party politics, as I think most of our country is.
Yep.
And I'm tired of it. And I think it's time that you focus on what's best for the country, what's best for your community, and take those as your marching orders.
Other than the infrastructure law, what I always tell our reporters, think about the leaders that you're covering. What's on their desk? Other than infrastructure, what's on your desk? What are some issues that you're, at the local level, I got to tackle this as a problem?
One of the things that's critically important to me and my community is how we take care of those people who have taken care of us, and those are the veterans. I also co-chair the Veteran Affairs Task Force for the U.S. Conference of Mayors.
And you serve, a former Marine.
And I'm a former Marine. In Arlington, we are currently building the National Medal of Honor Museum to honor those men and women who have received the highest honor in all of the military. I was surprised to learn that we haven't had a national museum to represent them. But how you take care of those who have taken such good care of us is representative of what type of community you live in. And in my community, they are passionate about taking care of veterans. So we formed a Veteran Affairs Task Force regionally, where we work with all of the regional veterans organizations, from Mission United, a part of United Way, VFW, the VA, the Department of Labor. Everybody comes together and works, and then the city acts as a conduit where we can get the veterans to all the wonderful organizations that are out there. So that's one of the big things for us, is taking care of our veterans.
And unlike some task forces in Washington, this one actually works.
This one works well. And let me tell you that, and when we partner up with people like the Department of Labor and the Veterans Administration and the White House, we have good partners. They are eager to help you on those things, and it's wonderful because we're not having entities compete against each other. We're bringing them all together and saying, let us be that conduit for you. Let us help you help those people. And it's working great. We love it.
What about COVID-19? Where are we? You mentioned mass transit. Obviously, that's very important for every city.
Sure.
Where are we now? How much did it impact your community? And where do we go from here?
Yeah, so I've been mayor all for about 2 years, so I came sort of on the tail end of the COVID-19 stuff. But it's still there. It hasn't gone away, and it's not going to go away. I think we're in for, at least in my lifetime, a lifetime of vaccinations and a lifetime of safety measures to ensure that we don't have it stir up like it has done in the past. It was devastating. It really was. I am a small business owner. I own a restaurant. My restaurant was shut down. I felt the impact. My employees felt the impact of it. And, we're blessed now that we've gotten back through this and we're prospering now. But we still have to recognize the importance of taking care of each other and respecting each other. We've allowed something as simple as being safe to be partisanship. And that's wrong. This isn't about party politics. Let's just take care of each other. And if we can take care of each other by protecting ourselves, by getting vaccinated, then do it. It's not about which party is right or wrong.
Right.
It's just about being decent to your neighbor.
Stakeholders at the local level, how important are they to work together with your office and maybe the federal government as well to get things done?
I think they're very excited about working together to get things done. Okay. I like to say relationships matter. You know, it doesn't always matter how much you know or what you know about this subject or that subject. you have to be able to work with people. You have to be able to work across the aisles. You have to be able to work with your neighbors. Just treat people decently and build on those relationships. Those relationships make a huge difference in getting things done. And I don't care if it's at the state level, the federal level, the county level, the municipality, wherever it is, those stakeholders believe in my area, believe in those relationships, and we're having good success with it.
Very important question to end. Are the Cowboys going to beat the 49ers this weekend?
Absolutely. You're talking our backyard and Dallas Cowboys playing right there in Arlington. They won't be playing at home this weekend. I understand that. But
there are a lot of Cowboys fans.
We weren't playing at home last weekend, and we traveled to Tampa, and you saw what we did there. Let's just pray that we can make a point after touchdown, okay?
That could be important this weekend.
Let's just pray that we can get those point afters, and we'll be okay.
Pretty exciting. Well, Mayor Ross, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Public transportation and equitable access to broadband can transform a city and offer more opportunity to its citizens. Joining me now is Jim Hovland, Mayor of Edina, Minnesota, who is the Vice Chair of the Transportation and Communications Committee over at the Conference of Mayors. Mayor Hovland, so great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you've been mayor since 2005. Quite a run there. Tell me how the job has changed.
That's a great question. I would say that over time, it's become more complex and more time consumptive. And for many of us that serve as suburban mayors, it's intended to be a part-time job, but it takes. I've got two full-time jobs, I guess I'll put it that way.
Okay.
One as a lawyer and one as a mayor of my city. Now, some of it's self-inflicted because I like to get involved in things in the region instead of just staying at home, in Edina. So I'm active in the region. I'm active in the state, and I'm active on a national basis because I think this is all important, and I hope makes me a better mayor.
Let's talk about transportation. How important is it for your community this finally got done? I'm sure you've been waiting and waiting and waiting for Congress to act. They finally have. What's the implementation? We've been talking to other mayors about that. What is the implementation, and how is it going, and how long is it going to take?
Yeah, well, it's another really superb question, I think. And, I think back to this pandemic and the period of COVID and what came out of it, that was a silver lining. And you start thinking about the commitment, I think, and a bipartisan commitment to make sure that we restore and advance our transportation infrastructure system and our broadband capabilities on a nationwide basis. There was a time when the United States more effectively and efficiently moved people and goods than any country in the world. Mm-hmm. And we don't do that anymore. And so we've got a lot of work to do, whether it's in the ports or it's on the rail systems, it's roads, bridges, transit. All of these things are critically important. And some of those funds that help our nationwide system operate efficiently and effectively come down to the local level where things are getting done there as well. So it might be a bridge in our town or a trail system for non-motorized movements. Money's dedicated that came down from the Federal Highway Trust Fund through the Minnesota Department of Transportation on to what we have. We have a regional governance body called the Metropolitan Council, where I also chair the Transportation Advisory Board of the Met Council, dealing with about $200 million in funding that comes down biannually from the Highway Trust Fund federally to be able to use in our region, just that metropolitan region. So now with the IIJA, it's now $300 million that we're dealing with annually. So that boost is really important to both preservation of the system and also expansion of the system to the extent it's necessary.
What was the effect of COVID? We're still in the pandemic, and especially because when we're talking about transportation, we're talking about mass transit and people not just driving their cars one-off to work. How has it been, and where is it going?
That's another really good question.
I've got a great staff. They give me the questions.
Yeah,
Really do.
and I think across America we're seeing this. There's this hybrid work situation. People aren't going to the office every day like they used to go to the office, and so as a consequence of that, we're seeing a bit less congestion on the freeway system. So where people were wondering, well, how are we going to expand this highway system of ours in the past? You don't hear people talking about that as much anymore. With transit, I think it's essential that what we restored is confidence, both from a public health and a public safety standpoint, in using those public transportation systems. In other places in the world where it's more dense, like Seoul, South Korea, 75, 80% of the people use mass transit to go to work. On the East Coast, it's more prevalent. There'd be a higher percentage of usage. But we're seeing in the Twin Cities, we're not seeing those numbers pre-COVID that we were seeing. We're not seeing numbers now that match up with what we had pre-COVID in terms of use of public transportation.
Okay. You had a program that you helped start that provided free internet to low-income residents. What did you learn from that? What was the impetus behind that?
I think the impetus was that when school districts decided that kids were going to go to remote learning, we wanted to make sure, not only in our town but in our state, that kids had every opportunity to continue to try to learn on a remote basis. And I think that had so many significant challenges to it. But one of the things we didn't want kids to face was access to the internet at the speeds that were appropriate and at an affordable cost for the families. So we partnered with our school district and figured out where we needed to have additional service. And then we used some of our ARPA money, our ARPA money to set up this program with Comcast on their Internet Essentials program, which discounts the cost significantly for internet to families that can't otherwise afford to have internet in their household.
And what was it? Did you see the effect of it? I mean, was it a game changer?
I think our school district would say yes. That was very, very helpful in having that program put in place, and it was a significant monetary commitment, and it continues on.
Now, as I mentioned in the intro, you're a leader on the Transportation and Communications Committee. Can you describe the communications? Because I think that's very important, because let's say when you pass a transportation bill, as Congress has done, then it's kind of very complicated. And you have to communicate, obviously, how do stakeholders access this information, RFPs, all those kind of acronyms that are kind of Washington-based. But what's the communication element of that? The
communications piece deals more with the broadband element of it, that technology piece. And there's a subcommittee chair for that, so I'm the vice chair over that entire umbrella of that Transportation Standing Committee on Transportation and Communications. And when the president promised he was going to have basically border-to-border, wall-to-wall internet for every American, I think that was the notion of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, led by our very effective staff and key mayors from around the country that helped build that capacity around broadband. And I think the former Mayor of Chattanooga is helping lead that now for the administration to make sure that we've got adequate internet service at an affordable cost all throughout the country.
That's very important. When you're meeting with you come into Washington every year, and you've been doing it for years. What do you learn from other mayors?
On a variety of topics, and of course we face challenges that might vary from meeting to meeting. For instance, we just had a session this morning on dealing with hate and bias. And 10 years ago, we wouldn't have had a session like that, but we've seen a surge in that kind of activity.
When you're saying hate specifically, what are you talking
hate, bias and hate crimes.
Hate crimes, right.
Acts of hatred that might not rise to the level of a crime.
Okay.
Anti-Semitic behavior, anti-brown and black people behavior, literature, or actual hate crimes that the Justice Department tells us are being ill-defined. There's an underreporting on hate crimes across the country, and we're seeing an increase in it. And in fact, one of the mayors that was there this morning was from Munich, Germany. She said the two categories that they're seeing an increase in difficulty with are anti-Semitic activity, and then also hate crimes against elected female politicians. Female politicians.
Wow.
So that was
troubling.
That was troubling news.
Troubling, yeah.
Very troubling news, and so it's global.
Okay, now the new Congress has started. We finally have a House Speaker. It's divided government for the first time in a bit. What do you want to see Congress do that would help your community? And the White House.
Yeah, and we've been used to a divided government in Minnesota. We've got an alignment for the first time in several years, so you can still get things done. And you can find that common ground, just like President Biden did with Congress, with some of these things that he wanted bipartisan support on and was able to achieve. And I think we can continue to find that common ground on some of these issues around, I think, technology. We talked about equity, diversity, inclusion, hate crimes. The list goes on. Housing affordability is a huge issue globally, and we're going to have to face up to that and figure out how the federal government and state governments can help deal with some of those housing affordability challenges. So
that's interesting because you don't hear a lot of politicians, at least in Washington, talking about that as far as passing legislation. I mean, I know some bits and pieces have passed before, but you'd like to see more of that.
Yeah, in fact, there's from a local standpoint in our state, and I think in every state, there's a clamoring by local elected officials to have their state governments make more of a financial commitment to the needs that we see in housing and the affordability of housing for all people, whether it's rent or owned. But we're not seeing that same level of commitment at the federal level. And I think that's something that we really need to be working on is having a better federal partner. And that seems to me to be something that should be agnostic from a political standpoint.
You'd think.
You'd think. You'd think.
Well, we've run out of time. Mayor Jim Hovland, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here today. All right.
Getting large-scale projects off the ground often means forging strong partnerships between the public and private sectors. Here to talk partnerships and the future of his city is the mayor of Atlanta, Andre Dickens. Mayor Dickens, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Bob.
First off, I know Atlanta's been going through some power outages because of tornadoes. Can you update us on the situation there?
Yeah, so the city of Atlanta is doing relatively okay. It's surrounding counties that really the tornado came from the west and came into the west side of Atlanta into some of our suburbs. So, Georgia Power, our power company, has been going around cutting down the trees that have broken down power lines and making sure that people get power restored. That recovery has been taking place over the past few days, and so now more and more residents have power. In the city of Atlanta, everybody has it right now.
It's a big discussion in Washington and across the country, across the globe, really, on climate change. What do we need to do because we're seeing more of these big weather events than we used to?
One, we have to admit that the world is warming up, that climate change is real, and that is something that we have to pay attention to, and we can't deny it any longer. Whether you're in a city that's like Atlanta or Birmingham or somewhere that's in that tornado possibility, or you're on the coast of Florida where you can see the beach erosion and that the shoreline is coming further and further into the community, and so it's all very real. So admitting that, but then the things we have to do are around making sure that we are climate sensitive in our actions around electric vehicles, around encouraging people to use transit, encouraging people to be, solarize their homes if they can, and so on and so forth. So that's why, I recently hired a chief sustainability officer. This officer is looking at everything inside the government and outside the government.
Is that a new position?
We had the position many years ago, but now I brought that position back and restored it with a very talented individual that can lead that department to everything from green jobs to clean energy to making sure that we're sustainable in our practices.
We're here in Washington. It's obviously a very polarizing time. Not to say back in the 1990s when I came to Washington, everyone was singing Kumbaya, but it's gotten more polarizing. Can you explain how it's different with mayors now that you guys are in town and I'm sure exchanging stories of how you can help each other's cities?
Yeah, so mayors just got to get the job done.
Right.
The people see us each and every day. They don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican when it's talking about a pothole or it's talking about making sure that, your garbage is picked up on time. So mayors have the distinctive job of we are residents of our community that everyone lives in and that votes in. So they got access to you at the grocery store, here at your kids' school games or whatever. They're going to talk to you about real issues affecting their families. And so while, Washington definitely has the political lens lens to it and a partisan politics. We don't get into that until maybe election season when we're rooting for our favorite candidates. And I definitely have had my share of partisan scenarios and making sure that Reverend Raphael Warnock went back to the Senate and Ossoff as well as Biden. But outside of that, in the mayor circle, most of us are just talking about, infrastructure, trying to make sure that we improve the city's infrastructure and make sure that it works for the future and for the now. We deal with public safety, crime, and making sure that things, violent crimes are down and that people are safe. And then also housing stability, affordable housing, and amenities around those communities so that people have a full life. So those things we just deal with and work on.
Now, you mentioned a lot of issues, a lot of problems across the country, and obviously politicians should be problem solvers. Yeah. You've been a leader in public-private partnerships. Can you explain the import of them and how they've grown over the years?
Yeah, this is important. Right now, I lead the U.S. Conference of Mayors P3 Task Force. I'm the chairman of that task force. P3 is a public-private partnership. And, I was a business leader in my past life before being mayor, and in technology, and I'm an engineer. So I've been around public-private partnerships in the business community. So when I came into government, I'm looking at what makes sense and what works best. And so the first thing we did, working with Tom Cochran and Mayor Suarez, that's the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and Mayor Steve Benjamin, we talked about how with the American Rescue Plan Act and the Infrastructure Act, all these dollars that are coming out, to be able to help cities be able to, go pursue the funding, to be able to implement the change, to be able to get those dollars and to make to get them out of your hands and into the community as fast as possible. The typical RFP process may not work as well for every investment that you're trying to do. So what we thought was best is show all these cities, these city leaders, what capacity could be gained by having P3s. A lot of folks don't know, what is a P3? Right. How do you go about utilizing that? What would be the benefits of it? And so for us, there are some scenarios where a public-private partnership will deliver that project better, faster, cheaper, and that will benefit your citizens in real time so that you don't have these ongoing procurement challenges that sometimes you hear cities having a hard time getting dollars out of their hands. So we started with that. Last year, I started the first meeting. It was a huge success. A lot of mayors came out. We had mayors and business leaders all in the same room, as well as some federal partners who was like, yeah, we're handing out dollars from the United States Department of Transportation. We want to see those projects get implemented. And if you don't have the capacity in your city, how do you get it done? We're talking about P3s. And so we did a big survey at our midpoint this year, and 100 cities responded, some small, some large cities, and they all said, have they ever experienced a P3 before? Do they want to learn more? Can they see the benefits? And what are some of the projects they're looking at? And so, this week while we're here, we're going to be talking about ways to implement P3s.
We held an event years ago with mayors, and they were basically screaming at Washington to say, we need to pass an infrastructure law. Yeah. It finally actually happened under President Biden. I was skeptical of it. I've been wrong a lot and right sometimes. I was wrong on that. I didn't think it was going to get through. It got through. And you mentioned the implementation. How is that? Because the Washington meeting really focuses on a bill, and then it passes, and then we move on to the next thing. Right. But there's the implementation. How is that going?
Yeah, the implementation is where it actually all matters, right? So that can you see that road being paved? Can you see that bridge being repaired? Can you see those sidewalks going in and those the various utilities and infrastructure changes going on? And so for us, we're taking those dollars and applying them right now. And so you can go to the city of Atlanta. We have our website that shows the progress of our various infrastructure projects. And so you get them in your hands, and you want to get them out of your hands as fast as possible so that you can be rewarded back by Washington. Right. So, they're elected officials that are in communities as well, whether that's the president or the secretaries, and they say, hey, we gave you guys resources that you asked for. How did you do? And do the citizens see the progress? And the answer is yes, particularly in affordable housing. We've utilized a lot of that money to help with homelessness that came about about during COVID, as well as a lot of challenges people had with paying rent stabilization, and being able to help folks be able to just, maintain their lives as inflation has gone up. So, we're utilizing that right off the bat to be able to provide some things that the citizens have asked for years. And now we're, and I've only been in office a year and about three weeks. So as you get it, you try to get it out of your hands.
Sure. You mentioned affordable housing. How do you make that equitable? Because that's such a big issue. You mentioned COVID too. Can you talk about that? Because that, has set so many communities back.
Yeah, so Atlanta is a victim of our own success. This city has been growing, and people keep coming to Atlanta. New businesses are coming there, big technology companies, all the logos. As you drive down the city now, it is every major corporation is coming to Atlanta to take advantage of our talent that we have from all of our colleges, the Georgia Tech, Georgia State, the AU Center, Morehouse, Spelman, Clark. I mean, we have a lot of smart people in our city, Emory, and we have a lot of companies. Well, what happens is you have a lot of need for housing units. And so the housing stock just hasn't kept up with the demand of all the people that are coming to our city. And so what we've had to do, I set an aggressive goal of building 20,000 units of affordable housing in 8 years. We started last year with an aggressive calendar of getting these units planned, and some have even gone up and been, about 1,500 have already been people moved into them. So in the first year, so we're going to be on pace to hit that 20,000, and it's a vital need to be able to make sure that you have mixed income communities. We don't want concentration of poverty where it's all low income in one area and all high income in another area. You want the community to have the developments that you're doing to be mixed income, so that the janitor, the school teacher, and the principal can live in the same community and their kids go to the same school. The police officer and firefighter and the nurse and the teachers, a lot of times those folks are driving in for an hour before their shift starts. Well, that impacts their productivity, it impacts their quality of life, and that may show up on their job. So we want to make sure that those great frontline people, those first responders, those critical service folks, those hardworking people that provide a great service to us, that they're nearby and that they can benefit from the amenities that are in our city. And so we've been very aggressive about affordable housing development, and we're utilizing P3s for some of them. We just bought a big building, which was one of the tallest buildings in Atlanta. The city bought it, and now we're going to do a P3 to be a public-private partnership to be able to have a developer that will co-develop this with us, so that we can have student housing, housing for our workforce, whether it's police, firefighters, and school teachers, as well as market rate housing for anybody that want to be in the penthouse level. And then we'll also have on the ground floor retail. All of that is coming about because of our intentionality around making sure people can live in our city, especially in our downtown.
Mayor Andre Dickens, I really appreciate you taking the time. I was going to ask you about the Braves and the Mets, but your Braves have had a better run than my Mets, so we didn't get to that one. But thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
After 2 years of remote work and economic pressure, local leaders all over the country are now rethinking the shape and scope of their city centers. To close out our program today, I am pleased to welcome Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser. The mayor announced her D.C. comeback plan designed to boost the population of D.C., revitalize downtown, and increase equity. For this conversation, I'm happy to be joined by D.C. News Now anchor Chris Flanagan. Glad you can join us, both of us, both of you. Mayor Bowser, let me first start with the bipartisan infrastructure law. What does it mean for D.C., and where are we in the implementation of it?
Well, it's a big deal. It's a big deal for D.C. It's a big deal for our nation. It allows us to catch up on aging infrastructures, bridges, airports. For us, we have a real focus on how we're going to use those dollars, $3 billion coming directly through the formulas, and even more possible through competitive grants. So we're very focused on it. I established a task force. It was led by former Secretary Slater, Secretary of Transportation Slater, and a businesswoman in D.C. To really help us focus on what would make a difference for our residents and our competitiveness, quite frankly. And so we have a set of recommendations. We're putting a team in place also to be ready for the competitive process to go after those grants.
Mayor Bowser, you're the chair here at the Mayor's Conference, International Affairs
Yes.
Committee. What role does a mayor play in international issues, and what can you learn from it to implement here in D.C.?
Well, that's a great question. We had the opportunity yesterday to sit down with Secretary Blinken. We've had at the U.S. Conference an International Affairs Committee for some time. And I recognized early on as a mayor, I've been mayor just starting my third term, so I've been mayor 8 years. And I knew when I started that D.C. really had to be on the global map. And I was concerned that we weren't. And how did we strengthen our relationships with other capital cities in the world? Unexpectedly, I think also we were the face of Washington, D.C. in the world, American values, American democracy, and it was really our pleasure to go around. But we also have economic focus on our missions around the world. So how do we attract foreign investment, whether it's in big economic development projects, the transformation of downtown, sports teams in D.C. or other places. So that's been an important part of our missions. But it's also a cultural exchange. I was very proud to lead the first ever mission to El Salvador, for example. You might say, why are you going to El Salvador? Well, our #1 immigrant population in Washington, D.C. is from El Salvador. Our second largest is from Ethiopia. So we also led a mission to Ethiopia. So our missions are economic and also cultural in exchange.
Mayor Bowser, obviously gun violence is a big topic here and big concern, of course, in D.C. Karan Blake, the 13-year-old boy from Brookland, was shot and killed recently. Will the police be releasing body camera footage, and do you think they should be releasing it?
No, they won't be releasing it because the investigation is ongoing, and it is important that the police and prosecutors have an opportunity to make that investigation happen. And in the administration of justice, it's important that it continue that way.
Do you think an arrest will be made soon? There's a lot of...
I have no idea, but I know that whatever the facts suggest and whatever the grand jury says, which I believe this will go to a grand jury, that's what will happen.
D.C. statehood, you pushed for it very hard, and in the last Congress, we had Democratic House, Democratic Senate, and of course, President Biden in the White House. It passed the House, but it didn't pass the Senate. Now we have divided government. Do you think this can happen, perhaps maybe in 2025, because the House and Senate will be up for grabs, and Democrats could control everything? And how disappointed were you that it didn't get through the Senate and they eradicated the filibuster?
Well, they didn't eradicate the filibuster.
No, they didn't.
If they had eradicated the filibuster, it could have happened.
Do you think you would have had the votes if they had done that?
Yes,
okay.
Because it would have taken a simple majority.
Yep.
And that's how most things work in a democracy. The majority rules. And we believe we could have definitely gotten to the majority in the Senate. Having to get to 60 votes is a hurdle, not just for D.C. statehood, for voting rights, for common sense gun regulation, for everything that will make our nation work better. So it's important that we get there. Our argument was that there should be a carve out to the filibuster for democracy issues. How do we protect the ballot? How do we ensure that every person gets, there's one person, one vote? And right now in Washington, D.C., people, Americans that pay taxes just like everybody else, who are just like everybody else, literally don't have a vote in their Congress. And it's un-American.
Mayor Bowser, 16 kids were killed last year, young kids in D.C. A lot of people tell us they're angry, they're tired, they're upset, they're heartbroken, of course. I know you've called it an emergency, you've thrown everything at it, you reportedly. How come it's not working? What can be done differently to bring this emergency
Well, I don't think it would be correct to say it's not working because last year alone we saw a 14% decrease in our homicide numbers over the previous year. We saw an overall decrease in violent crime. I hesitate to say that because we're not satisfied with it. nobody can be satisfied with 16 children who were killed, and sadly, they were likely killed by other children in many of those cases. So we know that we have to get to young people who are committing more dangerous crimes at younger ages, and we have seen that trend post-pandemic. And so how do we get to young people that are really in trouble? And we're focused with that in the schools. I had a meeting last week, a week and a half ago, with school principals from all of our secondary schools, so middle school principals and high school principals, about how they were working with us in a whole of government approach to identify kids in need and to better support them, because oftentimes they're our first sign that a kid's in trouble or a family needs more.
When you say the numbers are going down, are you worried about the perception, though, that D.C. is a violent city? That's kind of what people are scared.
People are scared all across America. Our cities and our towns are flooded with guns, and as long as we accept that as a way of life in our country, we're going to have experiences with gun violence. We had a child go into a school and shoot a teacher. We had a child, not in D.C., but we had a child get off the bus, 2 children get off a bus and were shot in a crossfire of people fighting with each other. And these are problems of guns. And we know if we had fewer guns, illegal guns and legal guns, we would be a safer city.
COVID-19 was devastating across the globe, and especially in D.C. Where are we now? I know you've
not especially in D.C.
It's been a problem as far as businesses closing. We've seen it. But where are we now? And how do we? You have a D.C. comeback plan.
Yes. Well, I just want to be clear that our residents and businesses stood together, shoulder to shoulder, to do what we needed to do to crush that virus, and that's what they did. They got vaccinated. They got tested. We stood up one of the best, in my opinion, testing programs anywhere in the country, so that our citizens would be safe. But we also know that a lot of our people immediately started teleworking, which I think kept our city safe. And the federal government, as one of our major employers, continues to have a very robust telework plan. So we know to have a vibrant downtown in Washington and New York in San Francisco, wherever you go, we need a mix of daytime traffic. So we're focused on, of course, getting most of our workers most of the time back in their offices, because we believe that's what people come to Washington to do, to work on big issues, to solve the world's problems. And we know they do it better when they can collaborate. But we also are challenged to get a better mix of space in our downtown. We see even examples in D.C. Of commercial areas that fared better during the pandemic, where there were more people already living there. So in a downtown, let's face it, that was built on the LaFont plan, okay? And the LaFont plan has wide avenues and big, majestic federal buildings. So what are we going to do to remake those spaces so that more people can live in downtown, or those buildings that may not ever be fully occupied again by workers have a different use? And that's our focus right now.
I know you've pressed the White House, in your comeback plan to get workers back downtown, federal workers. How is that going? Are you getting pushback? Is that going to work?
It's not clear to me, and this is our approach. We don't have our heads in the sand. We don't think that the way of work is going to be exactly the same as it was before the pandemic. But we also don't think that we should have a decentralized telework policy for our federal government, because I would challenge people to tell us how we're as productive. We see right now is every agency, every secretary basically can decide how their workers are coming to work. And we think, and we heard the president say in his State of the Union, and I hope that he will address it again, that we have done what we need to do in this country to manage this virus, to get people vaccinated, and it's safe to go back to work. And lead by example by having a a federal centralized policy that makes sense.
Last question. You clashed with former President Trump a lot. What do you think the chances are that he can come back and get back in the White House?
You know, I didn't think he could win the first time. Mm-hmm. So I have learned to not trust my instinct on that primary.
Well, you had a lot of company in that one.
Right. So I have to watch how that primary plays out. But in all seriousness, I hope that people who love our country and love democracy, respect the rule of law, and respect the ballot box are victorious on the Republican side.
We have run out of time, and that brings us to the end of our program. A big thank you to all of our mayors and to Chris for joining me. We also want to thank all of you for watching. For any of those who missed any of these conversations, we will have this video from the event up shortly on our website, thehill.com. I'm Bob Cusack. Hope you enjoyed the program. Have a great day.